June 17, 1944, the serpentine roads of Normandy, France. Dawn light filtered through a dense morning fog as Master Sergeant Ernest Jenkins of the 39 17th Quartermaster Truck Company sat behind the wheel of his GMC CCKW 6K6, the lead vehicle in a convoy of 24 supply trucks. The weather provided good cover from German aircraft, but Jenkins knew visibility worked both ways. The enemy could be anywhere. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Jenkins couldn't possibly know that morning was that his unconventional approach to convoy operations would soon revolutionize Allied logistics across the European theater, saving countless lives and significantly accelerating the defeat of Nazi Germany. The roads of France were deadly for supply convoys. Since the D-Day landings just 11 days earlier, the Red Ball Express hadn't yet been formally established, but urgent supply needs meant trucks were moving constantly from the beaches to the rapidly advancing front lines. The 39th and 17th, like many quartermaster truck companies in the segregated U.S. Army, was composed entirely of African-American soldiers led by white officers. First Lieutenant Walter Stevens, the convoy commander, had been a shipping clerk from Boston before the war. He'd spent the previous night studying the official Army field manual on convoy procedures, determined to run his first combat zone operation by the book. Remember, men, proper spacing. 300 feet between vehicles at all times, Stevens instructed during the pre-dawn briefing. Standard convoy procedure will be followed to the letter. The lieutenant was confident that military doctrine developed by the Army's finest minds would see them safely to their destination, the forward supply depot near Carrington, 25 miles inland. Jenkins, who had been driving trucks for the Livingston Freight Company in Detroit since 1936, listened respectfully, but had his doubts. "With all due respect, sir," he said, 300 feet of spacing in this terrain is going to stretch our convoy over 4 miles. That's a lot of road to defend. Stevens dismissed the concern with a wave. "That's standard procedure, Sergeant. It prevents chain reaction losses if we're attacked. One truck gets hit, the others survive." His tone made it clear the discussion was over. As the convoy prepared to depart, Private First Class Marcus Washington approached Jenkins. At just 19, Washington was the youngest driver in the company, having learned to drive on his family's farm in Mississippi. "Sarge, is it true what they're saying, that half the supply trucks aren't making it through?" Washington asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jenkins nodded grimly. "The Germans know they can't stop us on the beaches anymore, so they're hitting our supply lines instead, knocking out our fuel and ammunition before it reaches the front." He didn't add that the 39 17th was replacing another quartermaster company that had lost 17 trucks in the past week alone. Across the temporary motor pool, Staff Sergeant William Big Bill Davis was conducting final checks on his vehicle. At 6'4" and built like a linebacker, Davis had been a mechanic in Philadelphia before the war. He caught Jenkins' eye and gave a subtle nod that communicated volumes between the two friends who had trained together at Fort Eustis. 3 hours into the journey, the convoy maintained textbook military spacing as it wound through the Normandy countryside. Lieutenant Stevens rode in a jeep at the front, occasionally using his field glasses to scan the tree lines. Jenkins, directly behind him in the lead truck, watched with growing unease as the fog began to lift. They were entering a stretch of road flanked by dense hedgerows, perfect cover for ambushes. Sergeant Davis, driving the 5th truck in line, was the first to spot the German patrol. Through his side mirror, he caught a glimpse of movement along the ridgeline to their east, the unmistakable coal scuttle helmets of Wehrmacht infantry. Davis immediately flashed his brake lights, the prearranged signal for trouble. Jenkins saw the warning and made a split-second decision. Instead of following protocol to maintain spacing, he accelerated, closing the gap between his truck and the lieutenant's jeep. Over the radio, Stevens's voice crackled with anger. "Jenkins, fall back to proper interval immediately," but Jenkins had already keyed his own microphone. "All trucks, close formation, now." It was a direct contradiction of orders, but 4 months of convoy duty in North Africa had taught Jenkins lessons that weren't in any field manual. The sound of gunfire erupted from the hedgerows, a German ambush. Lieutenant Stevens's jeep swerved violently as his driver was hit. The vehicle careened off the road, crashing into the ditch. Jenkins braked hard, his truck skidding to a stop. Behind him, the convoy was collapsing the spacing, trucks closing to within 20 feet of each other in violation of every principle of convoy operations. "Washington, Davis, cover fire!" Jenkins shouted as he leaped from his truck, racing toward the lieutenant's overturned jeep. Bullets kicked up dirt around him, but the concentrated defensive fire from the trucks kept the German ambush team's heads down. With Davis providing covering fire, Jenkins reached the jeep. The driver was dead, but Stevens was alive, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Jenkins pulled him free and half-carried him back to the lead truck. "All trucks, fighting formation," Jenkins called over the radio. It was a term he'd invented, not found in any manual, but the men of the 3917th had trained for this moment in secret late-night sessions after their white officers had retired to their quarters. The convoy transformed before the Germans' eyes. Instead of scattered individual targets stretched over miles of road, they now faced what appeared to be an armored column. Trucks pulled within 10 feet of each other, drivers and assistant drivers laying down a coordinated pattern of fire from their cabs. The convoy's two machine-gun-equipped security vehicles, which had been in the middle and rear, accelerated to take positions on the flanks. "Move and fire, don't stop," Jenkins ordered as he got his truck rolling again, Stevens groaning in the passenger seat. The convoy lurched forward, maintaining its tight formation, creating a rolling fortress of interlocking fields of fire. The German ambush team, expecting to pick off isolated trucks at leisure, instead faced a coordinated defense they weren't prepared for. Their fire became sporadic, then stopped altogether as they fell back into the hedgerows. 10 minutes later, the convoy rounded a bend, and the sounds of battle faded behind them. They had survived with only minor damage to 3 trucks and 2 wounded men, including Lieutenant Stevens. "That wasn't procedure," Stevens said weakly, holding a bandage to his head. "No, sir, it wasn't," Jenkins agreed, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "But we're all still alive." At the forward supply depot near Carrington, the arrival of Jenkins' convoy caused a stir. Major Robert Carlton, the depot commander, had been expecting at most half the vehicles to arrive based on recent experience. "How you mean you didn't lose a single truck?" he asked incredulously as medics tended to Lieutenant Stevens. "No, sir," Jenkins replied. "We had to adjust our tactics, but every truck and nearly every man made it through." Major Carlton studied Jenkins with new interest. "Adjusted how, Sergeant?" Over the next hour, Jenkins explained his fighting formation concept to the Major. He'd developed it based on his experiences in North Africa and refined it through careful observation. The standard 300-foot spacing between vehicles, designed to prevent chain reaction losses from air attacks or artillery, actually made convoys more vulnerable to the ambush tactics now being employed by German forces in Normandy. "The Germans aren't hitting us with air power or artillery much anymore, sir," Jenkins explained. "They're using small teams with small arms and maybe a Panzerfaust or 2. When our trucks are spread out, each vehicle is on its own, no mutual support." Carlton nodded thoughtfully. "And your solution?" "Close interval convoys, sir. 10 to 20 feet between vehicles. Trucks become a single defensive unit. Everyone provides covering fire for everyone else. The Germans can't concentrate on any single truck without taking fire from half a dozen directions." It was unorthodox, contradicting established doctrine, but Major Carlton was a pragmatic officer who valued results over regulations. With supply losses crippling the Allied advance, he was willing to try anything that might work. "I'll need to see this in action myself, Sergeant," Carlton decided. "Tomorrow, I'm sending your company back out with double the load. I'll be riding along." That evening, in the temporary camp set up for the 3917th, Jenkins gathered his drivers. Lieutenant Stevens was in the field hospital, leaving Jenkins effectively in command. "Tomorrow, we show the Major what we can do," he told them. "But tonight we prepare." Staff Sergeant Davis stepped forward with a large sheet of paper. On it was drawn a detailed diagram of the new convoy configuration Jenkins had developed. "We're going to run drills until everyone knows their position and responsibility by heart," Davis announced. Private Washington raised his hand. "Sarge, what if the brass overrules us? This goes against everything they taught at Fort Eustis. Jenkins considered the question carefully before answering. Sometimes the book doesn't account for reality on the ground. Our job is to get those supplies through. The men at the front are counting on us. If the brass has a better way to do that, I'm all ears. But until then, we do what works. The next morning, Major Carlton watched with professional interest as the 39 17th prepared for departure. Instead of the leisurely, by-the-book preparations he was accustomed to seeing, the black soldiers moved with purpose and precision, each man knowing exactly his role. "Your men seem well rehearsed, Sergeant Jenkins," Carlton observed. "Yes, sir. Most of us worked together before the war, too. Driving trucks isn't just a job we were assigned by the Army. It's what we did in civilian life." This was true for many of the segregated transportation units. The Army had slotted black soldiers into service and supply roles rather than combat units, not realizing they were inadvertently creating specialized teams of men who were often more experienced at their assigned tasks than their white counterparts. The convoy departed at 800 hours, this time with 30 trucks carrying ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies urgently needed by the 4th Infantry Division. Major Carlton rode in the passenger seat of Jenkins' lead truck, still skeptical but curious. 5 miles out, they encountered their first test. A German reconnaissance plane, a Fieseler Storch, buzzed overhead, undoubtedly radioing their position. Jenkins immediately ordered the convoy into its tightest formation, what he called armored column. "Why bunch up when there's air observation?" Carlton questioned. "You're creating a more concentrated target." "Respectfully, sir, that plane isn't the threat. It's calling in our position to ground forces. Tight formation gives us better security when the real attack comes." Carlton frowned but said nothing. The plane soon disappeared, but the damage was done. Their position had been compromised. Less than 20 minutes later, as the convoy entered a wooded stretch of road, the attack came. German infantry opened fire from both sides of the road, accompanied by the distinctive thump of a mortar tube. "Fighting formation!" Jenkins called over the radio. The convoy instantly compressed, security vehicles moving to protect the flanks. Every other truck activated its ring-mounted 50-caliber machine gun, creating interlocking fields of fire. Major Carlton watched in amazement as the 39 17th executed a textbook response that existed in no textbook. Drivers maintained exact distances, gunners provided coordinated suppressive fire, and the convoy continued to move steadily forward through the ambush zone. When a mortar round landed directly in front of the third truck, the driver swerved precisely, the vehicle behind him adjusting in perfect synchronization to avoid collision. There was no radio chatter, no panic, just the smooth execution of a well-practiced drill. "How are they coordinating without orders?" Carlton asked, raising his voice over the gunfire. "Hand signals, brake lights, and practice, sir," Jenkins replied calmly as he navigated around a crater in the road. Lots and lots of practice. The convoy pushed through the ambush zone with minimal damage, 2 punctured tires and some bullet holes in cargo tops, but no casualties and no lost vehicles. Once clear, they maintained their tight formation until reaching the relative safety of American lines. At the forward headquarters of the 4th Infantry Division, Colonel James Williams could scarcely believe the report. "Every truck got through, all 30? "Yes, sir," Major Carlton confirmed, thanks to some unconventional tactics employed by Sergeant Jenkins here. Williams, who had been dealing with critical supply shortages for days due to convoy losses, turned his attention to Jenkins. "Explain these tactics to me, Sergeant." For the next hour, Jenkins outlined his approach, supplemented by Staff Sergeant Davis, who had brought their hand-drawn tactical diagrams. Jenkins explained how the close formation driving minimized the convoy's vulnerability to ambushes, how coordinated defensive fire made attacking even a portion of the convoy costly for the enemy, and how continual movement, never stopping during an attack, reduced their exposure to sustained fire. "It goes against our training, sir," Jenkins acknowledged. But the standard convoy procedures were developed for different conditions. The threat here isn't air attack or artillery. It's infantry ambushes and mines. We've adapted to the actual threats we're facing. Colonel Williams studied the diagrams thoughtfully. "And this reduced spacing doesn't lead to chain reaction losses?" "No, sir. In fact, it prevents them. When a truck is disabled, The tight formation means another driver can immediately see the problem and assist. We can often get damaged vehicles moving again in minutes, or transfer their cargo to functioning trucks if necessary. Williams exchanged glances with Major Carlton. How many convoys has your unit run using these tactics? 17 in North Africa, sir, and now 2 here in Normandy. We've lost a total of 3 trucks, compared to the theatre average of around 40% losses. The colonel made his decision. Major Carlton, effective immediately. I want Sergeant Jenkins to train all our quartermaster truck companies in these new tactics. Priority goes to units assigned to the Red Ball Express. Sergeant Jenkins nearly fell out of his chair. Sir, are you sure the other companies will accept training from? Williams cut him off. From a unit with a 90% better survival rate. They damn well better. This isn't about color. Sergeant, it's about getting supplies to my men so they can stay alive and keep fighting. 3 weeks later, the official establishment of the Red Ball Express, the massive supply operation that would become legendary for keeping Allied forces supplied during their push across France, incorporated what were now officially termed Jenkins Convoy tactics. While military regulations still specified the 300-foot spacing, a special theater operations order authorized adapted formations for high-threat environments. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Convoy losses dropped from nearly 40% to less than 5%. Supply throughput increased correspondingly, allowing frontline units to advance with confidence that fuel, ammunition and other necessities would reach them reliably. For Sergeant Ernest Jenkins, the recognition was bittersweet. His innovative tactics were saving lives and helping win the war, but the 39 17th Quartermaster Truck Company, like all black units in the segregated army, remained separate and unequal in most respects. They're using your ideas, but still treating us like we're not good enough to fight, Davis observed one evening as they maintained their trucks. Jenkins tightened a bolt with more force than necessary. This is about more than just us, Bill. It's about proving what we can do. Every truck that gets through because of our tactics helps end this war sooner. And maybe, just maybe, it changes how they see us. Little by little. Private Washington approached, wiping grease from his hands. Lieutenant Stevens is back from the hospital, Sarge. Wants to see you right away. Jenkins found Stevens reviewing paperwork in the company headquarters, a repurposed farmhouse near the growing supply depot at Cherbourg. The lieutenant's head wound had healed, leaving a jagged scar above his right eye. Sergeant Jenkins, Stevens said formally, standing as Jenkins entered. I've been hearing some interesting reports while I was recovering. Jenkins braced himself. Despite the success of his tactics, he had technically disobeyed orders during that first ambush. It seems, Stevens continued, that our company has become something of a model for convoy operations throughout the European theatre. He picked up a document from his desk. This is a commendation from General Patton himself, citing the 39 17th for exceptional service and tactical innovation. Jenkins stared in disbelief. General Patton, sir? The very same. A small smile cracked Stevens' typically stern demeanor. Apparently, the old man is quite impressed with how your tactics are keeping his tanks fueled and firing. He's ordered all transportation companies in Third Army to adopt the Jenkins method immediately. I don't know what to say, sir. You don't need to say anything, Jenkins. Your actions speak loudly enough. Stevens sat down, his expression growing more serious. I owe you an apology. I was too rigid, too committed to doing things by the book. If you hadn't taken initiative that day, many of us would likely be dead. The acknowledgement was unexpected. Relations between white officers and black enlisted men were rarely so forthright in the segregated army. Thank you, sir, but it wasn't just me. Every man in this company contributed to developing those tactics. I'm aware, and that's why I've put in recommendations for battlefield commissions for both you and Sergeant Davis. God knows we need officers who can think on their feet. The news left Jenkins speechless. Battlefield commissions for black sergeants were virtually unheard of. Before he could formulate a response, the door opened and Major Carlton entered. I see you've given him the good news, and Carlton said, There's more, Jenkins. Your company has been selected for a special assignment. The 6th Armored Division is making a breakthrough near St. Lo. They'll need constant resupply to maintain momentum. I need your best drivers for a special high-speed convoy. As the summer of 1944 progressed, the fame of the 3917th grew. The Jenkins method became standard practice throughout the European theatre, taught to incoming drivers as they arrived from the States. What had begun as a desperate improvisation by one sergeant had evolved into official doctrine, saving countless lives and accelerating the Allied advance across France. On August 15th, now Lieutenant Ernest Jenkins stood before the assembled drivers of 5 quartermaster truck companies. As one of the few black officers in the European theatre, his very presence was revolutionary, but it was his expertise rather than his race that commanded attention that day. "The situation has changed again, gentlemen," Jenkins began. "Our forces are advancing faster than anyone predicted. The supply lines are stretching thin. We're now looking at round trips of over 700 miles for some convoys." He unfolded a large map, showing the rapidly expanding Allied territory in France. Red lines marked the supply routes collectively known as the Red Ball Express. "The Germans know they can't stop our advance head-on, so they're increasingly targeting our supply lines with special operations teams. We've identified at least 3 dedicated German units, whose sole mission is to interdict our convoys." Staff Sergeant Marcus Washington, recently promoted after his exemplary performance during the breakout from Normandy, raised his hand. "What are we looking at for opposition, sir?" "Small, mobile teams, usually 8 to 12 men equipped with light machine guns, Panzerfausts, and sometimes a 20-mm anti-aircraft gun repurposed for ground attack. They're using motorcycles and captured vehicles for mobility, hitting quickly and then disappearing." Jenkins moved to a chalkboard where he had drawn a modified convoy formation. "We're adapting again. The threat has evolved, and so must we. This is what I call our rolling fortress configuration." The new formation featured an integrated security element, jeeps with mounted 50-caliber machine guns positioned at specific intervals within the convoy rather than just at front and rear. Additionally, every 4th truck would carry a specially trained combat team of 4 men with automatic weapons. "This isn't just a transportation operation anymore," Jenkins explained. "It's a combat mission that happens to deliver supplies. Every driver is now part of a fighting unit. Every convoy is a tactical formation." This philosophy represented a fundamental shift in how supply operations were viewed. Traditionally, transportation units were considered support elements, kept separate from combat operations. Jenkins was effectively militarizing the supply chain, bringing combat tactics to what had previously been seen as a purely logistical function. After the briefing, Major Carlton pulled Jenkins aside. "The brass at Chaff has taken notice of your innovations, Lieutenant. General Eisenhower himself has asked for a detailed report on your methods." Jenkins could scarcely believe it. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the highest echelon of command, was interested in the tactics developed by a former civilian truck driver and his segregated unit. "There's more," Carlton continued. "War correspondents are asking to ride along on your convoys. Your 3917th is becoming something of a legend, Jenkins." Indeed, the exploits of the 3917th had begun to appear in Stars and Stripes and even in newspapers back home. One headline in the Chicago Defender read, "Negro truckers revolutionize Army supply operations, save countless lives." Another in the Pittsburgh Courier proclaimed, "Black transportation unit shows the way in France." The attention brought both pride and pressure. Jenkins knew that the success or failure of his unit would affect perceptions of all black soldiers. Each convoy had to be perfect, each mission successful. On September 5, 1944, Lieutenant Jenkins led what would become one of the most celebrated convoy operations of the European campaign. With fuel reserves critically low, General Patton's Third Army faced the possibility of grinding to a halt just as it was poised to cross the Moselle River. A special convoy of 50 trucks carrying 175 0.0 gallons of gasoline was assembled under Jenkins' command. The planned route was 350 miles each way, much of it through territory only recently taken from German forces and still subject to infiltration by enemy units. Intelligence reports indicated that German special operations teams were specifically targeting fuel convoys, aware of Patton's critical shortage. "This isn't just another supply run," Jenkins told his drivers during the pre-mission briefing. "This is the difference between victory and stalemate. If we don't get through, Third Army stops in its tracks." The convoy departed at midnight, running without lights using the innovative cat-eye system Jenkins had developed. Tiny slits cut in the blackout covers of the taillights, visible only to following drivers who knew exactly where to look. The reduced visibility demanded extraordinary skill from the drivers, maintaining precise intervals, while navigating roads often damaged by combat. William Davis, now a lieutenant himself, commanded the security element. 5 jeeps equipped with 50 caliber machine guns and 20 infantry borrowed from a rear echelon MP company and hastily trained in convoy protection tactics. 6 hours into the journey, as dawn broke over the French countryside east of Reims, the convoy encountered its first challenge. A damaged bridge crossed a small river, barely wide enough for the trucks and with questionable weight capacity. "Advance team reports the bridge is rated for only 5 tons, Davis informed Jenkins over the radio. "Our trucks are loaded to over 10 tons each." Jenkins surveyed the obstacle. The detour would add 6 hours to their journey, time Patton's tanks didn't have. "We're crossing," he decided. "Single truck at a time, 25-meter spacing, maximum speed to minimize time on the structure." It was another violation of standard procedure, which would have mandated using the approved alternate route. But Jenkins had learned to trust his judgment and the skill of his drivers. One by one, the heavily laden trucks accelerated across the ancient stone bridge, each crossing causing visible vibrations in the structure. Engineers stationed on both sides watched anxiously, ready to signal if they observed signs of imminent failure. Halfway through the operation, the distinctive sound of aircraft engines grew audible from the east. 2 German Focke-Wulf 190 fighter bombers appeared, undoubtedly drawn by reports of the crucial American convoy. "Air attack! Disperse!" Davis shouted over the radio. The response was immediate but not as ordered. Instead of scattering, the trucks not on or approaching the bridge executed a maneuver the 39er 17th had practiced but never employed in combat. They rapidly arranged themselves in a circular formation, each truck positioned so its cargo of fuel was protected by the engine block of the vehicle beside it. The security jeeps moved to the center of the circle, their 50 caliber guns elevated for anti-aircraft fire. The Focke-Wulfs dived, machine guns blazing, but the concentrated fire from the defensive circle, combined with the unorthodox target pattern, threw off the German pilots' aim. Their bullets mostly struck dirt or the reinforced engine compartments rather than the vulnerable fuel tanks. After 2 passes, one of the German aircraft trailed smoke, hit by the accurate fire of Davis's gunners. Both planes broke off the attack, disappearing to the east. The convoy resumed its crossing of the bridge, completing the operation without losing a single vehicle. By noon, they had reached the forward refueling point where Patton's tanks waited, their fuel gauges hovering near empty. Colonel Creighton Abrams, commander of the 37th Tank Battalion and future Army Chief of Staff, personally greeted Jenkins as the convoy arrived. "Lieutenant, you have no idea how glad we are to see you," Abrams said, shaking Jenkins' hand vigorously. "Another 12 hours and we'd have been dead in the water." "Just doing our job, sir," Jenkins replied modestly. Abrams gestured to his tanks, lined up ready for refueling. "Because of you and your men, we'll be across the Moselle by nightfall. This isn't just fuel you're delivering, it's momentum." The successful delivery of fuel to Patton's spearhead units allowed the Third Army to maintain its aggressive pace, crossing the Moselle River and pushing toward the German border. It was a pivotal moment in the campaign, and the role of Jenkins and the 39 17th did not go unnoticed in after-action reports. By October 1944, the Jenkins method had become standard operating procedure for all Allied convoy operations in Europe. What had begun as the improvised tactics of a segregated truck company was now official doctrine, taught at training facilities in England and France. For the men of the 39 to 17th, there was pride in this accomplishment, but also a growing awareness of the irony inherent in their situation. They were revolutionizing battlefield logistics, saving lives, and accelerating the Allied victory, all while serving in an army that still treated them as second-class soldiers. This contradiction became painfully clear during an incident in late October. The 39th 17th, now officially designated as a training unit for convoy tactics, was based near Reims. During a rare evening of leave, Jenkins and several of his men entered a cafe that had been designated for American personnel. Their arrival caused an immediate stir among the white soldiers already present. Though officially all Allied facilities in the European theater were integrated by order of General Eisenhower, the reality on the ground often differed. "I think you boys are in the wrong place," drawled a sergeant from an artillery unit standing to block their path. Lieutenant Davis, towering over the man, answered calmly, "We're American soldiers on authorized leave, Sergeant. There is no wrong place for us in an Allied facility." The tension might have escalated further if not for the intervention of a major from the 4th Infantry Division. "Do you men know who this is?" the major asked the hostile group, gesturing toward Jenkins. "This is Lieutenant Jenkins of the 39th 17th, the outfit that developed the convoy tactics, keeping all of us supplied and alive." He turned to address Jenkins directly. "Your methods saved my battalion during the St. Lo breakout, Lieutenant. We were down to our last ammunition when your convoy got through. I owe you a drink, at the very least." The incident passed without further trouble, but it highlighted the dual reality faced by the men of the 39th 17th and other black units. Their contributions were increasingly recognized professionally, yet socially they remained segregated, their full humanity not yet acknowledged by many of their fellow Americans. Despite these challenges, the work of Jenkins and his men continued to evolve and expand in scope. By November 1944, as Allied forces pushed toward the German border, the 39th 17th had become a fully integrated transportation and security unit, responsible for training convoy personnel throughout the European theater. The culmination of their influence came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. As German forces launched their surprise offensive through the Ardennes, American units found themselves isolated, surrounded, and in desperate need of supplies. Conventional wisdom held that relief convoys could not get through the German lines. It was in this context that General Patton, preparing his counterstroke toward Bastogne, personally requested the 39th 17th to lead what many considered a suicide mission, breaking through to the surrounded 101st Airborne Division with critical medical supplies and ammunition. "I need your outfit for this one. Jenkins," Patton said during the hastily called meeting at 3rd Army headquarters, "nobody else has your record of getting through when it matters most." The request was both an extraordinary honor and a terrible burden. The route to Bastogne was held by elements of 5 German divisions, including panzer units. No previous supply convoy had successfully penetrated the encirclement. "General, with all due respect, we're truck drivers, not a combat unit," Jenkins pointed out. "What you're describing sounds like an armored breakthrough operation." Patton fixed Jenkins with his legendary stare. "That's exactly what it is, Lieutenant. But I don't have enough tanks to spare, and the weather's still too damn bad for air supply. What I do have is your outfit and your tactics." He jabbed a finger at the map. "The 101st is holding on by its fingernails in Bastogne. They need supplies in the next 72 hours, or they collapse, and with them, our entire flank." Jenkins studied the map, mind racing through the tactical problems. Standard convoy operations were impossible under these conditions, but perhaps something else might work. "We'll need tank escorts, sir, at least for the most dangerous segments." "You'll have them. 2 platoons of Shermans from the 4th Armored." Patton leaned forward. "But they follow your lead on this, Jenkins. Your convoy, your show." It was an astonishing reversal of normal military hierarchy. Tank units taking direction from a truck company, and a segregated one at that. But Patton's pragmatism trumped convention. He wanted results regardless of who delivered them. The operation was planned in 12 frantic hours. Jenkins, Davis, and Washington worked through the night, developing what they called a combat convoy configuration, a hybrid of transportation and assault tactics that had never been attempted before. The convoy that assembled the next morning was unlike any seen before. 20 trucks carrying ammunition, medical supplies, and rations were interspersed with 8 Sherman tanks. The trucks themselves had been hastily modified with additional armor, sandbags protecting the engines, steel plates welded to the doors. Each truck carried 6 infantry borrowed from rear echelon units, armed with automatic weapons and positioned to provide 360-degree coverage. The entire formation was designed to move as a single combat unit, capable of fighting through opposition rather than avoiding it. This goes against everything we've learned about convoy operations, Jenkins acknowledged to his assembled drivers. We've always focused on avoiding combat. Today we're deliberately seeking it out. Our mission isn't just to deliver supplies, it's to punch a hole through the German lines that our return convoy and others can exploit. The faces looking back at him showed a mixture of determination and concern. These were men who had signed up to drive trucks, not to spearhead an armored assault, yet not one requested to be relieved. The men in Bastogne have been fighting for 6 days surrounded by the enemy, Jenkins continued. All they've got left is heart and whatever ammunition hasn't been fired yet. We're their lifeline. Staff Sergeant Washington raised his hand. Sarge, sorry, Lieutenant. What are our odds of getting through? Jenkins didn't hesitate. I won't lie to you. Intelligence puts it at less than 30%. But those are better odds than the 101st has, if we don't try. At 0400 hours on December 22nd, 1944, under the cover of darkness and a heavy snowfall, the combat convoy departed from the American lines near Neuchâtel. Their route would take them through 25 miles of German-held territory, including 3 known strongpoints. The first 10 miles passed in tense silence, the convoy moving at a steady 15 miles per hour through the snow-covered forest roads. The only sounds were the low rumble of engines and the crunch of tires and tracks on packed snow. First checkpoint coming up, Davis reported over the radio from his position in the second truck. Intelligence says to expect a German roadblock. Jenkins, leading the convoy in the first truck, keyed his microphone. All vehicles prepare for contact, fighting formation. The convoy tightened its intervals, the tanks moving to cover the most vulnerable trucks. They crested a small rise, and there it was, a German roadblock consisting of 2 half-tracks and felled trees blocking the narrow road. In a conventional operation, the convoy would have either turned back or waited for combat units to clear the obstacle, but this was no conventional operation. Execute Breakthrough Plan Alpha, Jenkins ordered. The response was immediate and coordinated. The lead Sherman tank accelerated, moving past Jenkins' truck to the front of the convoy. Without slowing, it crashed through the barricade, pushing the obstacles aside despite heavy fire from the German position. The rest of the convoy followed in tight formation, trucks and tanks maintaining their precise intervals. The Germans, expecting the Americans to deploy and engage in a conventional firefight, were caught off guard by the sheer momentum of the assault. Within minutes, the entire convoy had pushed through, leaving the destroyed roadblock behind. First obstacle cleared, Jenkins reported. Minimal damage, no casualties. It was a promising start, but he knew the opposition would only increase as they pushed deeper into enemy territory. The second German position, located at a critical crossroads 15 miles into their journey, proved more formidable. As the convoy approached, they faced fire from well-emplaced German 88mm anti-tank guns, weapons capable of destroying any vehicle in the American formation. "Taking fire, left flank!" came the urgent call over the radio. "Anti-tank position in the tree line!" One of the Sherman tanks erupted in flames, hit directly by an 88mm round. The road ahead was fully exposed to the German guns, creating a deadly fire zone nearly half a mile long. Jenkins made another split-second decision. "All vehicles execute maneuver Bravo, now!" It was a contingency they had planned for, but hoped to avoid, abandoning the road entirely to move cross-country. The heavy trucks, not designed for off-road travel in winter conditions, would be severely tested. The convoy veered sharply right, crashing through a wooden fence and into the snow-covered fields beyond. The tanks led the way, creating tracks that the trucks could follow through the deep snow. It was slow, grueling progress, with each vehicle struggling for traction in the treacherous conditions. "We're burning fuel at 3 times the normal rate," Davis warned over the radio, "and making less than 5 miles per hour. "Keep moving," Jenkins insisted. "We'll worry about fuel when we reach Bastogne." For 2 hours, the convoy crawled through the frozen countryside, circumventing the German anti-tank position, but falling dangerously behind schedule. The detour added 7 miles to their journey and consumed precious fuel reserves. As dawn broke, they returned to the roads, now just 8 miles from Bastogne, but with German resistance intensifying. Twice more they encountered enemy positions, and twice they fought their way through using the coordinated tactics Jenkins had developed. The final approach to the American lines at Bastogne presented the greatest challenge. Intelligence had identified a substantial German blocking force, elements of a panzer division, including Tiger tanks, positioned specifically to prevent any relief from reaching the encircled Americans. "We can't go through them head-on," Davis observed, as they observed the German position from a concealed location half a mile away. "Those Tigers will tear us apart." Jenkins studied the situation through binoculars. The Germans had established a formidable roadblock covering the main approach to Bastogne, with interlocking fields of fire and no obvious bypass route. "We need a diversion," he decided, "something to draw their attention while we make a run for it." Lieutenant William Davis volunteered immediately. "I'll take 2 tanks and create a diversion to the north. Make them think a major attack is coming from that direction." Jenkins hesitated, knowing the danger of the mission. "Bill?" "It's the only way, Ernie," Davis said, using his friend's first name for perhaps the first time in their military service. "You get those supplies through. I'll meet you in Bastogne." The plan was set in motion. Davis departed with 2 Sherman tanks and 3 trucks configured to create maximum noise and apparent strength. They would stage a feint attack from the north, drawing the German armor away from the main road long enough for Jenkins to lead the supply convoy through. 20 minutes later, the sounds of heavy firing erupted from the north. Davis's diversion was underway, and judging by the response, it was working. Several German vehicles, including 2 Tiger tanks, could be seen moving to counter the perceived threat. "Now!" Jenkins ordered, and the main convoy surged forward, accelerating to maximum speed. The remaining Shermans took the lead, ready to engage any opposition that remained, while the trucks followed in tight formation. They were spotted almost immediately. German artillery began to fall around them, and machine gun fire raked the road. But the momentum of the American convoy carried it forward, vehicles weaving to avoid direct hits while maintaining their overall formation and direction. 1,000 yards from the American lines, they faced their final obstacle, a hastily repositioned German anti-tank gun that had been pulled back from the northern sector where Davis was creating his diversion. The weapon fired once, striking the lead Sherman tank and disabling it. The tank commander, though wounded, had the presence of mind to position his crippled vehicle to provide cover for the trucks behind him. "Keep moving," Jenkins shouted over the radio as he swerved around the damaged tank. "Don't stop for anything." The German gun crew was frantically reloading, trying to bring their weapon to bear on the next vehicle in line. They never got the chance. Concentrated fire from the truck's mounted infantry suppressed the position long enough for the convoy to pass. At 09:37 hours on December 22, 1944, the lead vehicles of Jenkins' convoy crossed into American lines at Bastogne. Of the 20 trucks that had started the mission, 17 arrived with their cargo intact. 5 of the 8 Sherman tanks had survived, though all showed damage from the desperate journey. The arrival of Jenkins' convoy was met with astonishment and jubilation by the surrounded defenders. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne, and famous for his one-word reply of "nuts" to the German surrender demand, personally greeted Jenkins as the supplies were being unloaded. "I don't know how you got through, Lieutenant, but you've just saved this division," McAuliffe said, shaking Jenkins' hand vigorously. "Just following orders, sir," Jenkins replied, his exhaustion evident but pride in his voice. "General Patton sends his compliments." McAuliffe laughed. "I bet he does, and he sent exactly the right man for the job." He looked over the battered convoy thoughtfully. "Your tactics, your planning, they deserve study at the Command and General Staff College." The successful Bastogne resupply mission entered military legend almost immediately. The arrival of critical supplies allowed the 101st Airborne to continue its defense until Patton's main force broke through 4 days later, effectively ending the German offensive in the sector. For the men of the 39th 17th, there was little time for celebration. Lieutenant Davis and his diversion force had taken heavy casualties, but succeeded in their mission. Davis himself had been wounded, but refused evacuation, leading his surviving vehicles to Bastogne by a circuitous route 10 hours after Jenkins' arrival. The reunion of the two friends, one black, one white, both now combat-tested officers, symbolized the beginning of a change in the Army that would accelerate in the post-war years. "Thought you weren't going to make it," Jenkins said as medics attended to Davis's wounded shoulder. "And miss seeing your face when I drove in. Not a chance." Davis winced as the medic probed his wound. "Did the brass finally acknowledge what we accomplished?" Jenkins nodded. "General McAuliffe is recommending the entire company for a unit citation, and there's talk of individual silver stars." "About damn time," Davis muttered, then grinned despite his pain. "Not bad for a bunch of truck drivers, eh?" The impact of Jenkins' innovations extended far beyond the immediate tactical success. By January 1945, as the Allied advance resumed following the defeat of the Bulge Offensive, the Jenkins method had been fully institutionalized throughout the European theater. Training teams, led by NCOs from the 39th 17th, rotated through all transportation units, fundamentally changing how the Army approached supply operations in combat zones. More significantly, the success of Jenkins and his men challenged fundamental assumptions about race and capability within the military hierarchy. When Generals Eisenhower and Bradley were briefed on the Bastogne resupply mission, Eisenhower reportedly remarked, "If black soldiers can plan and execute operations of this complexity under fire, then perhaps we should reconsider our policies on combat units." While full integration of the armed forces would not come until President Truman's Executive Order 9981 in 1948, the seeds were planted during these critical months of 1944 and early 1945, as black service units repeatedly demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond their assigned support roles. For Ernest Jenkins personally, the war's final months brought both recognition and new responsibilities. Promoted to captain, in February 1945, he was assigned to SHAEF headquarters as a special advisor on transportation security. His tactical innovations were incorporated into field manuals and training programs that would influence Army doctrine for decades to come. The story of the 39th 17th Quartermaster Truck Company remained largely unknown to the American public during the war years. Censorship and the racial attitudes of the time meant that newspapers and newsreels rarely highlighted the achievements of black units, even when those achievements were acknowledged within the military itself. It wasn't until 1948, when President Truman signed Executive Order 9981 desegregating the armed forces, that Jenkins was invited to the White House as part of a delegation of black veterans whose wartime service had helped make the case for integration. During that visit, General Omar Bradley, then Army Chief of Staff, approached Jenkins. "Your convoy tactics saved thousands of lives, Captain," Bradley said. "But more than that, they helped change minds, including mine." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want you to know that the new integrated army we're building will owe a great deal to what you and your men proved could be done." Jenkins, by then a rising executive at a Detroit automotive company that had eagerly recruited him for his logistical expertise, accepted the acknowledgement with characteristic modesty. "We were just solving problems, sir, figuring out how to get the job done with the resources we had." "That's exactly what made it so valuable," Bradley replied. "You didn't just follow doctrine, you created it based on ground truth and practical experience. That's a lesson the Army won't forget." Indeed, the influence of Jenkins' innovations extended well beyond World War II. During the Korean War, his convoy tactics were further refined and employed extensively along the tenuous supply lines supporting UN forces. In Vietnam, the concept of hardened convoys, operating as combat formations, rather than merely transportation elements, became standard procedure. Even in the modern era, military logistics experts studying convoy operations in Iraq and Afghanistan would recognize elements first developed by a black truck driver from Detroit, who saw problems not as insurmountable obstacles, but as challenges to be overcome through innovation and adaptation. The legacy of Ernest Jenkins and the 39th 17th Quartermaster Truck Company represents more than just a tactical innovation that reduced supply losses by 90%. It stands as a testament to the contributions of those who served despite discrimination, whose talents and capabilities challenged the very prejudices that sought to limit them. In the spring of 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Germany and the Nazi regime collapsed, Jenkins received a letter from Private Marcus Washington, who had been promoted to sergeant and was commanding his own convoy unit. "Captain," Washington wrote, "yesterday I led a convoy to the Rhine. We passed a column of German prisoners being marched to the rear. One of them, an officer, kept staring at our trucks. Finally, he asked the MP guarding him, 'Why do your supply trucks travel in such tight formations? Don't they fear air attack?' The MP just laughed and said, 'That's the Jenkins method, Fritz. Best convoy tactics in the ETO.' The German looked confused, but I felt 10 feet tall. What we built together has become something bigger than all of us, something that will last." Indeed, the innovations of Ernest Jenkins and his men would continue to save lives long after the guns of World War II fell silent. Their legacy lives on in military doctrine, in the evolution of combat logistics, and in the long, still unfinished journey toward true equality in American society and its institutions. Perhaps most importantly, their story reminds us that innovation can come from unexpected sources, that expertise is not confined to those with formal authority, and that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas emerge when people are empowered to solve problems based on their own experience rather than rigid adherence to established doctrine. Ernest Jenkins began the war as a sergeant in a segregated truck company, expected to do little more than drive supplies from point A to point B. He ended it, having fundamentally changed how the U.S. Army approached one of its most critical functions, the secure movement of materiel in combat zones. In doing so, he not only saved countless lives and accelerated the Allied victory, he also helped pave the way for the eventual integration of the armed forces and the broader civil rights advances that would follow. In 1998, more than 50 years after his innovations revolutionized military convoy operations, the U.S. Army Transportation Corps finally formally recognized Jenkins' contributions by naming its Advanced Tactical Transportation Course after him. The Ernest Jenkins Combat Logistics Program at Fort Eustis, Virginia, trains transportation officers and NCOs in the principles first developed by that resourceful sergeant in the hedgerows of Normandy. At the dedication ceremony, the commandant of the transportation school put it simply, "Captain Jenkins didn't just get the supplies through. He changed how we think about the very concept of supply operations in combat. He showed us that sometimes the best way to avoid a threat is to confront it directly with the right tactics and the right training." Ernest Jenkins passed away in 2002 at the age of 87, having lived to see the army he served transform into one of the most integrated institutions in American society. At his funeral, attended by Transportation Corps officers of all races, General Eric Shinseki, then Army Chief of Staff, eulogized him with words that summed up his extraordinary impact. "Some innovators change weapons or tactics or technology. Ernest Jenkins changed minds. He showed what was possible when talent was allowed to flourish regardless of race. He turned truck drivers into tacticians, convoys into combat formations, and in doing so, he helped win a war and change an army. We are all his beneficiaries." Today, the convoy tactics first developed by Jenkins and the men of the 3917th continue to evolve, adapted for new threats and technologies. But the core principles remain the same: coordination, mutual support, and the understanding that in modern warfare, there is no true distinction between the front line and the rear area. Every movement is a tactical operation. Every convoy must be prepared to fight as well as transport. It is a legacy built by men who were not even allowed to serve in combat units, yet who developed combat tactics that continue to save lives decades after they were first employed on the roads of Normandy. It is a testament to innovation born of necessity, to expertise developed through experience rather than formal education, and to the indomitable spirit of those who serve with excellence even when faced with prejudice and limitation. The story of Ernest Jenkins and the 3917th Quartermaster Truck Company reminds us that sometimes the most profound innovations come from those who are simply trying to solve immediate, practical problems without recognition or reward. It is a lesson in the power of ground-level expertise and the importance of allowing those who do the work to shape how the work is done. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.